What if the parts of yourself you've spent your whole life hiding, your anger, your envy, your insecurity, weren't meant to be erased, but reclaimed? We grow up believing that wholeness comes from being good, agreeable, and presentable. We learn to play the roles we're rewarded for and silence the parts that invite punishment or rejection. But beneath that performance, something else is always living, breathing, watching, the self we had to abandon. Carl Jung called it the shadow, an invisible twin made from all the qualities we disown. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And indeed, few things are more difficult than looking at your own unfiltered reflection. Because to meet your shadow is to face the truths that contradict your identity, the truths that were buried not because they were bad, but because they were inconvenient. Imagine a child repeatedly told not to cry. Over time, she stops showing tears, learning instead to swallow her sorrow and present a composed face. But the pain doesn't disappear. It becomes internalized shame. And this shame doesn't fade. It hardens. It grows armor. And then, without warning, it bleeds into adulthood. That child becomes an adult who apologizes for having needs, who flinches when offered kindness, who's uncomfortable with praise, who stays in toxic relationships because the discomfort feels familiar. Not because it's safe, but because her nervous system was trained in chaos. This is the invisible grip of the shadow, and it doesn't knock politely. It arrives as sudden outbursts, mysterious guilt, irrational jealousy. It appears in projections, the qualities we condemn in others that live inside us. We scorn the arrogant because we buried our pride. We dislike neediness because we were taught to suppress vulnerability. We hate selfishness because we never felt allowed to claim our own space. Every judgment we place on others is a flashlight, pointing to the exile corners of our own psyche. But here's the paradox. What we suppress gains power. The more we run from our shadow, the more control it gains over our lives. Left unchecked, it doesn't go dormant. It finds new ways to express itself. In sarcasm, in chronic exhaustion, in perfectionism, in people-pleasing, in addictions we don't call addictions. Overwork, overachievement, overgiving. You might think your burnout is about your schedule, but sometimes it's the shadow trying to prove you're good enough. You might think your rage is unjustified, but sometimes it's the voice that was silenced too many times. You might think your anxiety is weakness, but sometimes it's the price of constantly suppressing your truth. Real healing begins when we stop editing ourselves and start integrating. This doesn't mean indulging destructive behavior or excusing harm. It means listening deeply to the parts you were taught to ignore. It means asking, what is my anger trying to defend? What is my jealousy pointing toward? What is my sadness trying to say? The answers don't always feel noble. Often, they reveal needs we were taught to reject. The need to be seen, to be heard, to have space, to say no, to take up room. These are not flaws. They are human essentials that got mislabeled as threats. Jung believed that the shadow isn't a pathology. It's a container for our vitality. Beneath every so-called flaw is a hidden virtue. Rage masks boundaries. Envy reveals desire. Shame points to a yearning for self-acceptance. Even procrastination holds wisdom. It protects you from tasks that might reinforce an identity you've outgrown. When you welcome the shadow, you begin to decode your life. Triggers stop being random. They become messages. You understand why that one comment hits so hard, why that person gets under your skin, why certain compliments feel unbearable. You start to realize the discomfort isn't danger, it's data. But here's where most people get stuck. Integrating the shadow requires surrendering the identity built around being good. And that's terrifying. Because if you're not always kind, always strong, always calm, then who are you? You might discover that your truest self is messier than you thought, less perfect, but also more real, more rooted, more free. You stop needing to prove you're enough because you know that all your parts, including the dark ones, belong. And in that radical act of inclusion, you reclaim your energy. You stop wasting life managing perceptions and start living from authenticity. Shadow work is not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming whole. And in a world that rewards surface over substance, wholeness is a quiet rebellion. Facing your shadow isn't an elegant intellectual exercise. It's a visceral reckoning. It's realizing that the thing you despise in your partner, your friend, your enemy, may be something you once disowned in yourself, and now it has returned, not as reflection, but as confrontation. Take envy, for example. We're taught to suppress it, to pretend we're happy for others, even when their success twists something inside us. But that twist isn't malice, it's a mirror. It shows us where we've denied our own desire, our ambition, our longing to rise. We envy the confident because we've buried our voice. We resent the wealthy because we've associated abundance with guilt. We bristle at freedom because we've shackled ourselves to obligation and over-responsibility. Envy, then, is not a sin. It's a symptom. It reveals the hunger you were taught to silence. The shadow speaks in riddles. Its language is emotion. The feelings we were never allowed to fully feel become frozen code, waiting to be translated. And when life triggers that old, unprocessed story, through a breakup, a job loss, a betrayal, the code activates. We spiral, not because we're weak, but because the psyche is trying to finally finish a story we once paused mid-sentence. But instead of decoding, we distract. We self-improve. We hustle harder. We say affirmations over the ache, but unacknowledged pain doesn't evaporate. It compounds, and it starts to own us from the inside out. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Most of us don't realize that the patterns we suffer through are not random. They're choreography, not imposed from above, but generated from within. That failed relationship, it repeated a wound. That impossible boss, they mirrored your inner critic. That self-sabotage, it wasn't recklessness, it was your shadow pulling you back into the familiar discomfort of control.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your feedback means a lot, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
This is the paradox of growth. Transformation feels threatening, not because it's wrong, but because it breaks the loyalty we've formed with our suffering. When the nervous system has normalized chaos, peace feels suspicious. When you've learned to survive on emptiness, abundance feels overwhelming. When you've defined yourself through struggle, ease feels like identity loss. And so, we sabotage, not with a bang, but with small, logical decisions. We back away from love. We delay the launch. We ghost the friend. We downplay the opportunity. We pretend it wasn't that important. But underneath, the truth echoes. I didn't believe I was allowed to have it. To reclaim that permission, we must first see what we've buried. We must become curious, not condemning, about our most disruptive reactions. Ask not, what's wrong with me? But, what is this emotion trying to protect? Rage might be protecting a boundary you never knew you had. Procrastination might be protecting you from shame. Perfectionism might be guarding an inner child terrified of rejection. When you slow down and listen, really listen, you discover that the shadow isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to protect the parts of you that once felt unsafe. The shadow, in its purest form, is your most loyal bodyguard, but it's guarding old wounds with outdated tactics. It's like a security system, built in childhood, that never got updated. It still rings alarms when someone gets too close, still flashes red when you try something new, still blocks peace because it thinks you won't survive it. And unless we consciously rewire that system, we'll keep reliving the same loops, new faces, same dynamics. That's why some people keep dating the same person in different bodies, why they keep quitting just before the breakthrough, why they feel exhausted no matter how much rest they get. The answer isn't more effort, it's more integration. Integration isn't dramatic, it's slow. It looks like pausing before reacting, journaling the trigger instead of projecting it, speaking the uncomfortable truth instead of burying it, saying, I feel envy without shame, saying, I want more without guilt, saying, I'm scared without apology. It's not about becoming fearless, it's about becoming honest. And this honesty opens a door, one that leads not just to healing, but to wholeness. Because what the shadow hides is not just pain, but potential. The creativity that got dismissed, the passion that got tamed, the voice that got quiet, the desire that got deferred. Shadow work doesn't just help you stop hurting, it helps you start living. It hands you back the parts of yourself you thought were lost forever. And in that reclamation, something miraculous happens. Your shame becomes your story. Your pain becomes your path. Your darkness becomes your depth. Not all light comes from above. Some light is born underground, in the compost of your wounds, the soil of your sorrow, the cave of your unspoken truth. This is the light that doesn't blind. It humbles, it heals. If you've ever wondered why you keep reliving the same painful story, just with different names, different cities, different seasons, you're not alone. The shadow doesn't just live in you. It chooses your scenery. It picks your partners. It writes the roles you end up playing. Because until we integrate the parts of ourselves we've exiled, we will keep unconsciously calling them back to us through relationships, through crises, through sabotage peace. This is not punishment. It's repetition in service of resolution. The psyche doesn't want revenge. It wants repair. Think about it. How often do you end up in relationships where you feel invisible, just like you did as a child? How often do you get close to success, only to retreat, unconsciously echoing the moment when your joy once got crushed? How often do you sabotage good things because deep down you believe you're not worthy of them? This is how the shadow speaks, not through words, but through reenactments. It's the woman who keeps falling for unavailable partners, not because she lacks self-respect, but because deep down, emotional distance feels familiar. It's the man who destroys his own wins, not because he's careless, but because triumph stirs guilt he doesn't know how to carry. The unconscious is not chaotic. It's loyal. It will choose pain that feels familiar over peace that feels foreign, because survival loves what's predictable. And if your nervous system was wired for disappointment, then calmness will feel like a threat. That's why so many of us mistake anxiety for intuition. We feel a tug in our gut and call it truth, but it's often just old fear dressed in new language. Or we leave good situations claiming they don't feel right, when in fact they just don't feel familiar. The shadow feeds on this confusion. It keeps us locked in cycles by making dysfunction feel like destiny. And we justify it. I'm just unlucky in love. I'm not built for ease. Good things never last. But beneath those stories lives a deeper belief. I'm safest when I'm struggling. And so we hold back, not because we lack courage, but because we fear disloyalty to our past selves. Who am I to succeed when my mother gave up her dreams for the family? Who am I to be happy when my father spent his whole life angry and unseen? The shadow doesn't just carry pain, it carries generational loyalty. We inherit not just trauma, but the rules of what's acceptable to feel, want, and express. Rules like, don't shine too bright, don't speak unless asked, don't ask for more, don't outgrow your roots, don't rock the boat. And when we begin to break those rules, by healing, by expanding, by saying no, the shadow stirs. It doesn't punish, it whispers. It makes us feel guilty, selfish, arrogant, unlovable. And so we shrink again, back into the shape we were rewarded for occupying. But healing asks us to disappoint the system that shaped us, to name the pattern, to grieve what we never received, to realize that our suffering isn't proof of depth, it's a signal of what's still unresolved. To step into peace means choosing betrayal, not of others, but of the false self we've had to perform. And yes, it's terrifying, because once you take off the mask of the fixer, the peacemaker, the strong one, you're left face to face with something far more vulnerable. Your unmet needs, your actual feelings, your hidden dreams, and it feels like standing naked in a storm. But that's where your power begins, not in performance, but in presence. To say, I'm not okay without apologizing. To say, I want more without flinching. To say, I'm worthy without needing proof. That is how the shadow is integrated, not by conquering it, but by listening to what it's been trying to say. Because the parts of you that sabotage aren't trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect you from humiliation, from abandonment, from repeating past wounds. But they're using an outdated map, one built from a version of you that no longer exists. You are no longer the child who had to be quiet to be safe. You are no longer the teen who had to hide their joy to belong. You are no longer the adult who had to hustle for crumbs of approval. You can choose a different story, but only if you stop confusing trauma-bonded tension with love. Only if you stop mistaking chronic stress for passion. Only if you stop wearing struggle like a badge of honor. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to thrive. You are allowed to feel good without fearing the fall. And that too is shadow work. Learning to tolerate joy without bracing for loss. Learning to stay in peace without calling chaos back. Learning to accept love without searching for the exit. This is how we reclaim our lives, not by erasing the past, but by releasing the belief that we must always be at war with ourselves. The shadow is not your enemy. It's your wounded twin waiting for reunion. There comes a moment in shadow work, not dramatic, not loud, when something shifts, a soft internal click. Not a revelation, but a recognition. You realize you've been running from a part of yourself that only ever wanted to be heard. It wasn't your rage that ruined the relationship. It was your refusal to admit you had needs. It wasn't your fear that kept you stuck. It was your belief that fear made you broken. And now, for the first time, you don't try to fix yourself. You just sit with yourself. You let the ache breathe. This is the beginning of integration. Not a perfect balance, not immediate peace, but a quiet willingness to stop fighting yourself, to walk beside your shadow, not as enemy or project, but as witness, to say, I see you, I won't exile you again. You begin to notice the subtle moments where your old reflexes rise, but this time, you don't obey. You feel the pull to criticize, and you soften instead. You feel the urge to flee love, and you stay one breath longer. You feel the old script cueing you to apologize for your joy, and you let it land without shrinking. This is how change takes root, not in grand declarations, but in 1,000 microscopic choices, a different tone, a delayed reaction, a deeper inhale, the choice to pause instead of perform. And slowly, the war within you starts to end. You no longer chase people to prove your worth. You no longer overgive to earn affection. You no longer confuse being needed with being loved. You start asking, does this feel true to me? Rather than, will they approve? And that shift, subtle, seismic, is how you reclaim your center. Because true healing isn't about becoming a better version of yourself. It's about remembering the version of you that didn't need to earn your place. The one before the masks, before the roles, before the applause and the shame. It's remembering that you were always whole, but certain parts of you got buried under survival, and the journey back isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. You revisit the same themes, but with a deeper gaze. You meet the same fears, but with a stronger spine. You face the same mirrors, but with kinder eyes. And when you begin to live from that place, not perfection, but presence, you start to see through the illusion that more achievement will soothe the ache. That being liked is the same as being loved. That strength means silence. That success must cost your soul. You stop buying those lies because you've sat with your truth. And your truth is simple, though not easy. You are never too much. You are never not enough. You are always just human, messy, beautiful, growing, aching, laughing, longing. You are always worthy of peace, not when you arrive, but exactly as you are. And that's when the final layer of shadow peels back. Not the shame, not the rage, but the belief that you have to keep striving to be enough. You realize, maybe life isn't a test. Maybe it's a remembering. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just tired of pretending to be okay. Maybe joy isn't something you earn, but something you learn to allow. And when that shift happens, your entire relationship to suffering changes. Pain no longer defines you. It informs you. Discomfort no longer paralyzes. It guides. Triggers no longer dominate. They teach. Even conflict becomes less about defense and more about curiosity. Why does this hurt? What story is it poking? Whose voice am I hearing in my head right now? You become your own translator. Not because you figured it all out, but because you've stopped needing certainty to feel safe. You can sit in the unknown without panic. You can watch yourself fall and rise without shame. You can offer compassion to your mistakes instead of punishment. This is the fruit of shadow integration. You no longer abandon yourself when things get hard. And that is everything. Because if you don't abandon yourself, you don't need others to rescue you. If you don't betray your own boundaries, you don't need to blame others for crossing them. If you don't perform for love, you can receive it without fear. You become the stable presence you've always sought. Not infallible, not invulnerable, but rooted, real, home. And from that home, everything changes, not just within you, but around you. You attract people who respect your no. You create work that reflects your essence. You move through the world not trying to prove, but to express, to contribute, to connect. And you realize this is what you were always chasing. Not the job, not the person, not the status, but the feeling of coming home to yourself.